Sister Agatha was 84 years old, and to most people at the St. Jude Community Center, she was simply part of the building. You know how there are things in a place that you see every day, but never really look at? A crack in the wall, a picture frame that's always tilted, or a specific chair in the corner? That was Sister Agatha. She wasn't just old. She was ancient in a way that made people speak a little softer around her. Even though she was hard of hearing and wouldn't have heard them anyway, she was a small woman, shrinking a little more every year, it seemed. Her back was rounded from years of bending over prayer books and hospital beds, and her hands were maps of blue veins and sunspots. She always wore the same long black dress and a stiff white headpiece that framed a face full of deep wrinkles. Her eyes were a pale, watery blue, usually looking down at the floor or at her hands, which were always busy. If she wasn't folding laundry, she was peeling potatoes in the kitchen. If she wasn't peeling potatoes, she was mopping a floor that didn't really need mopping. The community center was a loud place. It was a big brick building in the middle of the city where people came for all sorts of reasons. There were after-school programs for noisy kids, support groups for parents, and hot meals for anyone who was hungry. The air always smelled like floor wax, boiled cabbage, and the dusty scent of old books. It was a place of chaos and movement, full of running feet and shouting voices. And in the middle of all that noise was Sister Agatha, moving like a slow, quiet river current through a storm. On this particular Tuesday, the center was more chaotic than usual. It was the week of the big annual talent showcase. This was the biggest event of the year for the neighborhood. Everyone got involved. The mayor sometimes came, local news cameras showed up, and the auditorium was packed to the brim. For weeks leading up to it, the building buzzed with a nervous energy. Youngsters were practicing dance routines in the hallways. Someone was testing microphones with loud screeches of feedback. And the director, a tall, stressed-out man named Mr. Henderson, was running around with a clipboard yelling orders. Agatha watched it all from the edges. She didn't seem to mind the noise, but she certainly wasn't a part of it. She had just finished a large batch of vegetable soup in the industrial-sized kitchen. Her knees ached, a sharp, grinding pain that she had learned to live with a long time ago. She wiped her hands on her apron, hung it up on a hook, and shuffled out into the main hallway. "Watch out coming through." A young teenager shouted, zooming past her on a skateboard. He didn't see her. He was focused on his friends at the other end of the hall. Agatha pressed herself flat against the wall to let him pass. She didn't scold him. She just waited until the wheels were silent again before she pushed herself off the wall and continued on her way. She made her way toward the large storage room at the back of the building. She needed to fetch some extra folding chairs for the auditorium. The storage room was down a long, dimly lit corridor that smelled of damp cardboard. It was far away from the music and the shouting. As she walked, she passed the main auditorium doors. They were propped open to let the air in, but the sound escaping was loud. A band of teenagers was on stage. They were playing electric guitars and drums with a lot of energy, but not much skill. The bass vibrated the floor under Agatha's worn-out sneakers. She paused for a moment in the doorway. Mr. Henderson was standing in the center aisle, his hands on his hips, looking up at the stage with a frown. "No, no, no." He shouted over the noise. "Cut the music. We need more energy. This is a show, not a funeral. Let's go, guys. Wake up." The music stopped abruptly. "Sorry, Mr. Henderson." A kid yelled back. Agatha watched them. She saw the sweat on the kids' foreheads, the way the drummer tapped his sticks nervously on the rim of the snare drum. She saw the lights, bright and harsh, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air above the stage. It was all so fast, so bright, so loud. She turned away and continued down the hallway to the storage room. She didn't feel sad that she wasn't involved. She wasn't jealous of the attention. She had lived a life of service and prayer for a long time, and she had found peace in being invisible. Being invisible meant you could see things other people missed. You could see the worried look on a mother's face when she thought no one was watching. You could see the kindness of a janitor who stayed late to fix a toy for a crying child. Agatha saw these things. She stored them away like secret treasures. She reached the storage room and pulled the heavy sliding door open. It squeaked on its tracks. Inside, it was dark and cluttered. Stacks of tables, piles of costumes from plays gone by, and boxes of decorations were piled high. She found the stack of metal folding chairs in the back. They were heavy and cold. Agatha looked at the pile. She was just one small old woman. She needed to carry at least 10 chairs to the hall. She couldn't make more than one trip because her legs wouldn't allow it. She knew she should ask for help. One of the volunteers, a young man named Kevin, who usually worked in the gym, was just outside. But she hesitated. Everyone was so busy with the show. They were all rushing around, stressed and tired. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be the old nun who slowed everything down. She sighed, a small rattling sound in her chest. She grabbed 2 chairs by their tops. They were awkward and unbalanced. She lifted them, her arms trembling slightly under the weight. It wasn't the weight of the chairs that made it hard. It was the awkwardness of it. She began to walk slowly back down the hallway, the metal legs clanking softly against each other with every step. As she passed the auditorium doors again, the band had started up a new song. It was faster and louder than before. Agatha shifted her grip on the chairs. The pain in her lower back flared up, shooting down her leg like a bolt of lightning. She stopped, closed her eyes for a second, and breathed through it. She leaned against the wall for just a moment to let the spasm pass. "Sister?" A voice broke through her concentration. She opened her eyes and saw a young girl standing there. She was maybe 10 years old, wearing a bright pink leotard and tights. She had ribbons in her hair and was holding a water bottle. "Hello, dear," Agatha said, her voice raspy but kind. "Do you need help?" the girl asked. She looked up at Agatha with wide, innocent eyes. "Those look heavy." Agatha smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the skin around her eyes. "Bless your heart, child. I am all right. Just taking my time. I can help," the girl insisted. She reached out and took one of the chairs from Agatha's grip. "I'm going to the auditorium anyway for my dance practice." Agatha let the chair go gently. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very kind of you." Together, the old nun and the young girl walked the rest of the way to the auditorium. It was a strange sight, the black habit, and the pink leotard, the slow shuffle, and the energetic skip. When they reached the doors, the girl set the chair down and dashed inside to join her friends. Agatha followed more slowly. She placed her chairs near the back row. She didn't leave immediately, though. She stood near the back wall, hidden in the shadows of the heavy curtains that framed the entrance. The band on stage was finishing their song. The feedback squealed again, making everyone wince. Okay, that's enough for now," Mr. Henderson shouted. "Take 5, everyone." We set up the lighting cues next. The stage cleared out quickly. The musicians jumped off the stage, laughing and high-fiving. The auditorium emptied out a bit as people went to grab snacks or use the restrooms. It became quiet for a brief moment. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. Agatha stood there in the quiet. She looked at the big stage. It was vast and empty. In the center of it, all alone, sat a grand piano. It was an old instrument, dark mahogany with a few scratches on the legs. It looked out of place among the electric guitars and amplifiers. It looked like a relic from a different time. Mr. Henderson walked down the aisle looking at his clipboard. He saw Agatha standing there. "Oh, Sister Agatha," he said, sounding surprised. "I didn't see you there. Are you looking for a seat? We're just on a break." "Oh no," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "I was just bringing chairs. I am on my way back to the kitchen." "Okay, well, stay out of trouble," he said with a distracted smile. "Big night coming up?" "Yes," she said. "Good luck, Mr. Henderson." He nodded and walked away, shouting at someone to turn off the stage lights. Agatha's eyes drifted back to the piano. It sat there, silent and imposing. She stared at it for a long time. The air in the room felt different when she looked at it. The smells of the cafeteria faded, and the noise of the rehearsal faded. For just a second, she felt a strange pull in her chest. It wasn't a feeling she had felt in a very long time. It was a mix of excitement and deep, deep fear. She shook her head slightly, as if to clear a thought from her mind. She adjusted her shawl and turned away from the stage. She had soup to finish cooling. She had floors to sweep. She was just a helper, a background person in a world that loved the spotlight. She wasn't a performer. She was just Sister Agatha, the quiet old nun who everyone saw but nobody really knew. She shuffled back out into the hallway, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Behind her, the piano sat alone on the stage, waiting in the dark. The afternoon sun was cutting through the high, dusty windows of the main assembly hall, creating long golden beams that danced in the air. It was that time of day when the busy morning activities had slowed down, but the evening chaos hadn't quite started yet. The building felt like it was holding its breath. The sounds from the kitchen were distant murmurs, and the clatter of the basketballs in the gym was just a faint, rhythmic thumping. Sister Agatha was not in the kitchen, and she was not in the chapel. She was standing in the middle of the empty hall. She had finished her chores early. The mop buckets were put away, the tables were wiped clean, and she found herself with something she rarely had: free time. Her hands felt strange without a rag or a vegetable peeler in them. She clasped them together in front of her, the fingers intertwining nervously. At the far end of the large room, the piano sat. It looked lonely. It was a massive instrument, much too big for the corner it was shoved into. It was an old beast, with a dark, reddish-brown finish that had faded in spots where the sun hit it every day. The gold lettering on the front was mostly worn away, so you couldn't read the brand name anymore. But Agatha knew what it was. She could smell it from across the room, the specific scent of old wood, felt and dust that only a piano has. Usually this area was a mess. Because the piano sat unused for most of the year, it had become a table. If someone needed a place to put their coat, they threw it on the piano. If they had a stack of flyers, a coffee cup, or a gym bag, it ended up there. The volunteers treated it like a piece of furniture, not an instrument. It made Agatha sad, a deep, quiet ache in her chest, to see such a noble object treated like a shelf. But she never said anything. It wasn't her place to tell the young people how to treat their things. She just watched from the shadows, shaking her head slightly. Today, however, the pile of stuff on top of the piano had grown dangerous. There was a precarious stack of printed programs for the upcoming show, a heavy spotlight case, and several winter jackets belonging to the staff. It looked like a small landslide waiting to happen. Agatha walked toward it. Her footsteps echoed in the big empty room. Tap, shuffle, tap, shuffle. As she got closer, she slowed down. She approached the piano the way a person might approach a sleeping animal, not wanting to wake it, not wanting to be near it. She reached the instrument and stopped. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. Up close, she could see the scratches on the legs, the nicks in the wood, and the layer of gray dust that had settled on the smooth surface. It was tired. It looked just as tired as she felt. She reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers were bent with arthritis, the knuckles swollen and stiff. She hovered her hand just above the keys, afraid to touch them yet. She remembered, suddenly and sharply, the feeling of keys under her fingers when she was young. She remembered the power she used to have, the way she could make a room of people go silent with just one chord. But that was a lifetime ago. That was before the vows, before the silence, before her hands turned into the claws of an old woman. She pulled her hand back, feeling a sudden wave of doubt. Who was she kidding? She was just an old woman who cleaned floors. The music was gone. But then she looked at the stack of heavy spotlight cases sitting right on top of the music stand. That wasn't right. It was disrespectful. All right, she whispered to the empty room. Let's clean you up. She started by taking the jackets. She folded each one carefully, smoothing the fabric with her palms until they were neat squares. She stacked them on a nearby chair. Next were the programs. They were glossy and colorful. She picked them up and tapped them against the edge of the piano to straighten the stack, then placed them on a table. The hardest part was the heavy spotlight case. It was made of thick plastic and metal, and it was heavy. Agatha grunted softly as she lifted it. She had to use both hands and her knee to lever it off the piano. The case made a loud screeching noise against the wood as she dragged it. Earek. The sound made her wince. I'm sorry, she whispered immediately, looking at the piano as if she had hurt its feelings. I'm sorry. She lugged the case to the floor and set it down gently. Now, the top of the piano was clear. It was just the fallboard and the keys. Agatha stood there, breathing a little harder from the effort. She looked at the fallboard, the wooden lid that covered the keys. It was closed tight. It looked like a coffin lid. It kept the music trapped inside, or perhaps it kept the world safe from the silence. She looked around the hall again. The double glass doors at the other end were closed. The hallway outside was empty. Everyone was at lunch or in meetings. She was truly alone. The only sound was the humming of the large overhead lights and the distant thumping of a basketball from the gym. Agatha reached out. Her hand shook visibly as she placed her fingers on the cool wood of the fallboard. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of the old wood filled her nose. It smelled like her childhood. It smelled like the church she grew up in. It smelled like peace. With a gentle push, she lifted the fallboard. It moved on its hinges, settling back onto the piano trim. There they were. The 88 black and white keys. They looked yellowed and dirty. Some of the ivories were chipped. The sharp black keys were matte, worn down by fingers that had played them long ago. But to Agatha, they were beautiful. They were not just plastic and wood. They were possibilities. They were a way to speak without using words, a way to cry without tears, and a way to laugh without making a sound. She didn't sit down on the bench yet. She couldn't. She felt too unworthy. She just stood there looking at the keyboard. It was like looking at a foreign language she used to be fluent in, but hadn't spoken in 50 years. She reached out with her right index finger. It was crooked, the nail thick and yellowed. She touched the middle C key. She didn't press it down. She just rested her finger on it. She felt the hardness of the plastic. She felt the tension of the spring mechanism underneath. It was alive. Slowly, she applied the tiniest bit of pressure. The hammer struck the string inside. A low, dull note rang out. Thumb. The sound wasn't perfect. It was slightly out of tune, and it had a bit of a buzz to it. The piano needed work. It needed a tuner to come and tighten the strings. But in that big, empty hall, the note was powerful. It vibrated in the air, bouncing off the walls and the ceiling. It hung there for a long time before fading away into silence. Agatha pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. Her heart was hammering in her chest. She looked around frantically, checking the doors. She expected someone to come running in, shouting at her to stop touching the equipment. But nobody came. The basketballs kept thumping. The lights kept humming. She looked back at the keys. The single note had awakened something in her. It was a spark, deep down in the pit of her stomach. It was a feeling she had suppressed for decades. She had taken vows of obedience and humility. She had dedicated her life to serving others in silence, putting her own desires, her own talents, away in a box. She had told herself that music was a thing of the past, the vanity of her youth. But standing there, looking at the chipped keys, she realized that the music wasn't just in the past. It was inside her. It had been waiting all this time, buried under layers of habit and routine. Just like the piano was buried under coats and flyers, she wiped her sweaty palms on the sides of her black dress. She felt a sudden urge, an itch in her fingers that she couldn't scratch. She wanted to hear another note. She wanted to hear 10 notes. She wanted to hear them all together. Agatha looked at the bench. It was a simple wooden bench with a padded top that was ripping at the seams. It was pushed in. She reached down and grabbed the edges of the seat. She pulled it out. The wooden legs made a scraping noise against the floor. Scrop. She walked around the end of the bench. She stood in front of the piano, facing the keys. She looked at the empty seat, then at the keyboard, then at the empty hall. She felt like a thief about to steal something precious. But there was no one to stop her. She lifted her skirt slightly and sat down. The bench was hard. It was lower than she expected. She adjusted her position, shuffling forward until her knees were just under the keyboard. Her posture was terrible. Her back was hunched. Her shoulders rolled forward. She looked nothing like the elegant pianists she had seen in concerts. She looked like a tired old woman taking a rest. But when she placed her hands on the keys, everything changed. She hovered her hands over the keyboard. Her fingers curved automatically. It was a habit etched into her muscle memory. Her right hand looked like a bird's claw, stiff and bony, but as she lowered it onto the keys, it settled into a shape that was graceful. Her left hand found the bass notes. She didn't play a song yet. She just pressed down a simple chord. Her thumb, middle finger, and pinky pressed down together. C, R, R, R. The sound was louder than she expected. It was a jangle of imperfect strings. But it was a chord. 3 notes singing together. Agatha closed her eyes. A small tear formed in the corner of her eye and trickled down her cheek, disappearing into the wrinkles of her skin. She sat there, her hands resting on the keys, listening to the sound fade into the dusty air. She didn't play another note. She didn't have to. She had opened the door. She had touched the keys. And for the first time in half a century, Sister Agatha didn't feel invisible. She felt like a musician again. Asterisk, the next few days passed in a blur of noise and frantic activity for everyone at the community center. But for Sister Agatha, time seemed to move differently. She went about her duties as usual, sweeping the entryway, organizing the food pantry, and wiping down tables, but her mind was constantly elsewhere. It was back in the assembly hall, sitting on that hard wooden bench. Her fingers, usually so busy with work, felt itchy and restless. She found herself tapping rhythms on the handle of her mop and humming soft, complex melodies under her breath while she peeled potatoes. It was Thursday, just 2 days before the big show. The rehearsal schedule had been pushed to the limit. The volunteers were tired, the staff was short-tempered, and the air in the building crackled with stress. Mark was a young guy, maybe 20 years old, with messy hair and a t-shirt that had seen better days. He was one of the tech crew volunteers, which meant he was the one who had to deal with tangled cords, blown fuses, and heavy equipment. He was good with his hands, but he was exhausted. He had been at the center since 7 in the morning, and it was now past 2 in the afternoon. His stomach was growling, and his back ached from lifting speakers. "I need a break," Mark muttered to himself, wiping grease off his hands onto his jeans. Just 5 minutes to sit down and eat a sandwich. He had left his clipboard and his lunch bag on top of the grand piano earlier that day. It was the highest flat surface near the stage, and everyone used it as a table. He walked into the assembly hall, expecting it to be empty. The morning rehearsal block was over. In the afternoon, session wasn't supposed to start for another hour. The big double doors were closed to keep the noise from the hallway out. Mark pushed one of them open. It swung heavily on its hinges. The hall was dim, the stage lights turned off to save electricity. Only the natural light from the high windows cut through the dust, creating long, pale beams across the floor. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. The silence in the room was heavy and peaceful compared to the chaos of the hallway. He took a deep breath, stretching his arms over his head, and started walking toward the piano. He was looking down at his phone, checking a text message from a friend. He was about halfway, across the floor when he stopped. He heard something. It was faint at first, a sound that didn't belong in the empty hall. It wasn't the creak of the building settling. It wasn't the hum of the lights. It was a sound that was clear and pure. It was a musical note. Mark looked up, frowning. He thought maybe someone had left a radio on, or perhaps the sound system was picking up interference. But as he listened closer, he realized it wasn't a radio. It was a piano. He walked softer, his sneakers making no sound on the carpeted aisle. The sound grew louder as he approached the stage. It wasn't just random notes. It was music. And it wasn't the simple, clunky melody of a beginner learning Twinkle. Twinkle, Little Star. It was complicated, fast, and flowing. Mark reached the edge of the stage and stopped dead in his tracks, sitting at the piano. Bathed in a shaft of white light from the window was Sister Agatha. Mark's mouth opened slightly. He froze, afraid that if he moved, the spell would break. He had seen Sister Agatha 1,000 times. He had held the door open for her. He had said good morning to her. And he had watched her struggling to carry heavy garbage bags. To him, she was just the quiet old lady in the black dress. She was part of the background, like the paint on the walls. But the woman sitting at the piano right now didn't look like the background. Her posture had changed. The hunch in her back was gone. She was sitting up straight, her body leaning slightly forward, completely focused on the keys. Her head was bowed, her eyes closed, as if she were in a deep trance or a deep prayer. Her habit flowed around her, making her look like a dark shadow against the shining wood of the instrument and her hands. Mark had never seen hands move like that. They were old and wrinkled, yes, spotted with age, but they were flying across the keyboard. The left hand was jumping down the lower end, playing deep, booming bass notes, while the right hand was scampering up the high keys like a spider running across a web. It was a chop and piece. Mark didn't know much about classical music, but even he knew this sounded difficult. The notes were cascading down like a waterfall, tumbling over each other in a rush of sound that was somehow sad and beautiful at the same time. The piano was old and out of tune, but under Agatha's fingers, it seemed to wake up. The strings vibrated with a richness that Mark hadn't thought possible. The music filled the huge hall, bouncing off the walls and the ceiling. It was so loud that it seemed to push the dust out of the air. Mark stood in the shadows, completely forgotten. He felt a strange chill run down his arms, raising goosebumps on his skin. He realized that he was witnessing something secret, something private. He felt like an intruder. He watched her face. She wasn't smiling. She looked intense, almost pained. Her eyebrows were furrowed together, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. She was playing with a passion that was fierce and angry. It was as if she had been holding this music inside her for 50 years. And now that it was finally coming out, she couldn't stop it. She hit a series of chords, heavy and dramatic, and then the music softened. The right hand began to play a gentle, weeping melody, while the left hand kept a steady heartbeat rhythm. It was heartbreaking. It sounded like a memory of a place you can never go back to. Mark forgot about his sandwich. He forgot about his clipboard. He forgot that he was tired. He just stood there, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, completely mesmerized. He had seen professional bands play on this stage. He had seen rappers and rock guitarists, but none of them had ever held the room like this. None of them had ever made him want to hold his breath just so he wouldn't miss a single note. The music grew faster again, building up speed and volume. Agatha's foot was pressing the sustain pedal, her leg moving slightly with the rhythm. Her head swayed from side to side. She was lost in the sound. She wasn't an old nun anymore. She was a conductor of emotions, pulling sorrow and joy out of the wires and hammers. Then abruptly the music changed. The fast, complicated run stopped. She played a final, slow series of chords. Asterisk, bum, bum. Bummed asterisk. Each chord was suspended in the air, ringing out into the silence. She held her hands over the keys, her fingers trembling. Before lowering them for the very last note, ching. She let the note fade. She sat there, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes still closed. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than before. It felt charged, like the air after a lightning strike. Mark let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. It sounded loud in the quiet room. Agatha's eyes snapped open. She jumped, her body stiffening as if she had been caught doing something wrong. She turned around on the bench, looking toward the shadows of the aisle. "Who is there?" she called out. Her voice was shaky, not the calm, slow voice she usually used. Mark realized he couldn't hide. He stepped out of the shadows, his face red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sister," Mark stammered. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just came for my clipboard." Agatha stared at him. Her face flushed a deep shade of pink. She quickly closed the fallboard over the keys, hiding them as if they were something shameful. She grabbed her walker, which was parked next to the piano, and pulled herself up with difficulty. The confident musician was gone in an instant, replaced by the frail, elderly woman Mark knew. "Oh," she said, smoothing down her dress and avoiding his eyes. "Hello, Mark. I was just cleaning." "Yes, I was just wiping the keys." They were very dusty. Mark looked at her. He looked at the closed piano. He looked at her hands, which were trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to hide them. "You were amazing," Mark said softly. "I've never heard anything like that." Agatha shook her head quickly. No, just nonsense. Old memories. I was just testing to see if the instrument still works. It is quite out of tune, I am afraid."
No.
"It didn't sound out of tune," Mark said. He walked closer to the stage steps. It sounded incredible. "Sister, are you playing in the show on Saturday?" Agatha laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Oh, goodness me, no. Look at me, Mark. I am an old woman. I clean the floors. I do not perform. People come to see a show. They want to see energy. They want to see excitement. They do not want to watch a nun struggle to reach the pedals." Mark shook his head. "That's not true," he said. "I've been listening to these rehearsals all week. The bands are okay, but what you just did, that was real. You have to play, sister. You have to—" Agatha looked at the young man. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just being polite. He was looking at her differently now. He wasn't looking at the cleaning lady. He was looking at an artist. "Please," she whispered, "do not tell anyone. Mr. Henderson would be angry that I was touching the equipment. And I am not ready. Not for the world to see." "I won't tell him," Mark promised, walking up to the piano to grab his clipboard and his lunch bag. "But sister, you shouldn't hide it. Music like that, it's meant to be heard. It's a gift." Agatha lowered her eyes. "It is a gift from a long time ago," she said quietly. "And gifts like that are better left in the past." Mark stood there for a moment, wanting to argue, wanting to drag Mr. Henderson in right now and make him listen. But he saw how scared she looked. She was terrified of being seen. So he just nodded. "Okay," Mark said. "Your secret is safe with me. But I think you're wrong." He turned and walked away, heading back toward the doors. He paused at the doorway and looked back. Sister Agatha was sitting back down on the bench. She wasn't playing anymore. She was just resting her hand on the closed fallboard, her head bowed. Like she was saying goodbye to an old friend one last time. Mark walked out into the noisy hallway, but the sound of the piano stayed with him. He knew he couldn't just let it end there. He knew that people needed to hear this, but he also knew he couldn't force her. He would have to find another way. Saturday night arrived faster than anyone expected. The St. Jude Community Center was unrecognizable. The smell of floor wax and boiled cabbage had been replaced by the scent of fresh popcorn, strong coffee, and the sharp tang of hairspray. The big hall was packed. Every folding chair was filled, and people were standing in the back along the walls. There were neighborhood families, local business owners, politicians in suits, and street kids in hoodies. It was a loud, happy, chaotic mix of the city. Backstage, behind the heavy velvet curtains, the air was thick with nerves. Mr. Henderson was shouting into a headset, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. He was pointing at young performers, checking microphones, and wiping sweat from his forehead. "Where is the juggler? He was supposed to be on 5 minutes ago." Mr. Henderson yelled to no one in particular. Sister Agatha was standing as far away from the action as possible. She was tucked in a dark corner behind a tall stack of amplifier cases. She felt like she was going to be sick. Her stomach was churning. And her heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack a rib. She had not agreed to perform. Not really. It had been a strange set of events. After Mark had found her playing, he had gone to Mr. Henderson. But instead of telling on her, Mark had simply told the director that there was a surprise closing act that would bring the house down. Mark had promised it was professional, mysterious, and uplifting. Mr. Henderson, stressed and desperate to fill a gap in the schedule, had trusted him. Mark had then come to Sister Agatha and practically begged her. He had told her that the show needed a soul, not just noise. He had looked at her with those puppy dog eyes, and for some reason, she had said yes. Now, standing in the shadows in her old habit, she regretted it. She looked down at her hands. She had rubbed lotion into them for an hour, trying to soften the skin, but they still looked like old tree branches. She felt like a fraud. She was about to walk out there and try to play a piece she hadn't played seriously in decades. On a piano she'd only touched twice, in front of hundreds of people. "You're on in 5. Agatha, a stagehand, whispered as he ran past. Carrying a guitar cable, Agatha closed her eyes. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She just took a deep, shaky breath. Outside, the show was nearing its end. The crowd had been entertained. A group of breakdancers had gotten huge applause. A little girl singing a pop song had been adorable. The energy in the room was high, but it was a restless energy. People were shifting in their seats, checking their watches. The announcer walked out to the center stage microphone. He was a local radio host with a very loud voice. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, and the crowd cheered. "We have one final act for you tonight. It is a very special mystery guest. We aren't going to tell you who it is. You just have to wait and see. Please put your hands together for our finale." A polite ripple of applause went through the room. People craned their necks to see who was coming out. Was it a famous local band? A comedian? A visiting politician? The lights dimmed. The chatter in the crowd died down. The spotlight operator, a young woman sitting in the back booth, waited for the signal. Behind the curtain, Agatha felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mark. He looked nervous too. "You can do this, sister," he whispered. "Just play like you did the other day. Forget they are there. Just play for you." Agatha looked at him. She wanted to run. She wanted to go back to her kitchen and peel potatoes for the rest of her life. But then she thought about the music. She thought about the way it felt to let it out. She nodded once, a tiny, sharp movement. "Go," Mark said. She stepped forward. The stagehand pulled the heavy curtain aside just enough for her to slip through. As Agatha walked into the bright light, confused murmur rolled through the audience like a wave. People squinted. They saw a small, hunched figure in a black and white habit moving slowly toward the piano. It took a moment for them to realize who it was. "Is that Sister Agatha? The lady who works in the kitchen? What is she doing up there?" The whispers spread quickly. The applause was polite but sparse. It was the kind of clap you give when you don't know what is happening but you want to be supportive. People settled back in their seats, expecting a simple nursery rhyme or maybe a short speech. They expected her to be sweet, boring, and harmless. Agatha reached the piano. She didn't look at the crowd. If she looked at them, she would freeze. She kept her eyes on the instrument. The spotlight was blinding, turning everything else into blackness. She sat down on the bench. It creaked loudly, and the sound echoed through the microphone system. Causing a few giggles in the front row, Agatha adjusted her habit. She pulled the hymn up slightly so her legs could reach the pedals. She reached out and lifted the fallboard. It seemed to take forever. The wood felt heavy. She placed her hands on the keys. They were cold. She took a deep breath and held it. The room was silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Someone coughed in the back. Then she let her breath out and struck the first chord. It wasn't a gentle chord. It was a punch. It was a low, growling C minor chord that seemed to grab the audience by the throat. The giggling stopped instantly. The whispers died. Agatha didn't wait. She launched into the music. It was Sergei Rachmaninoff, a composer known for being difficult and emotional. The notes were dense and thick, requiring huge stretches of the hand. Agatha's left hand began to pound out the heavy, rhythmic pulses of the bass, like a heartbeat getting faster and faster. Her right hand flew up the keyboard, playing cascading runs of notes that sounded like rain pouring down a tin roof. On the first page of the music, emotion was pure anger and power. Agatha's head bowed down, her chin almost touching her chest. Her body swayed violently. She wasn't the sweet, passive nun anymore. She looked fierce. Her face was twisted in concentration, her lips pulled tight. The people in the front row sat up straight. The man checking his phone put it away. The bored teenagers in the back stopped talking. They were seeing a transformation. Right in front of their eyes, the old woman was disappearing. The frailty was gone. She was possessed by the music. The sound that filled the hall was massive. It was far bigger than she was. It bounced off the walls and vibrated the floor. It wasn't just sound. It was physical. You could feel it in your chest. Agatha's hands, those old knotted hands, were moving with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. They were a blur. She was hitting the keys hard, really hard, digging into them. She was playing with a strength that came from somewhere deep inside, maybe from the years of silence, maybe from the prayers she had never spoken out loud. The music shifted. The angry, fast rhythm broke into a sweeping, romantic melody. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. The tempo slowed down. Agatha lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were closed, tears streaming down her face unnoticed. She played the melody with a tenderness that made the audience hold its breath. It was a sound of longing, of love lost, of a life that could have been in the audience. A mother wiped a tear from her cheek. A tough-looking guy in a leather jacket stared with his mouth open. Even the sound engineer in the back booth stopped adjusting his dials and just watched through the window. This wasn't a performance. It was an exorcism. It was Agatha pouring 60 years of unspoken life into the piano. She was playing for the children she had helped raise, for the sick she had comforted, for the God she served, and for the girl she used to be. She moved into the climax of the piece. The music grew complicated again. The right hand was playing fast chords while the left hand was doing jumping octaves. It was athletic. It was dangerous. If she missed a note, it would break the spell. But she didn't miss. Her fingers found every key, driven by muscle memory that had survived decades of neglect. The volume grew louder and louder. She was standing up slightly on the bench, throwing her whole body into the instrument, pulling the sound out of it. The grand piano was singing, roaring, crying. The vibrations were shaking the sheet music stand. Then came the final run. Her hands raced down the keyboard, a blur of black and white keys, rushing toward the end. She slammed her hands down for the final massive resolution chords. Asterisk, boom, boom, boom. Asterisk, asterisk, silence. Agatha's hands flew off the keys and landed in her lap. She sat there, chest heaving, sweating, her hands shaking violently. She stared at the keys, terrified to look up. The silence stretched on for 3 seconds. For seconds. It was so quiet, you could hear the dust settling. Then, a sound erupted. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. The entire audience surged to their feet as one person. People were shouting, "Bravo," and "Encore." A young girl was whistling. The old man in the front row was clapping so hard his hands were red. Agatha flinched at the noise. She opened her eyes and looked up, startled. She saw the wall of people standing, their faces glowing with admiration and shock. She saw Mr. Henderson in the wings, his clipboard forgotten on the floor, his hands clapping above his head. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to this. She felt a small, shy smile tug at the corner of her mouth. She slowly stood up. Her legs were weak. She turned to face the audience. She didn't bow like a performer. She just offered a simple, clumsy curtsy, the way she had been taught to do as a little girl. The applause got even louder. It washed over her like a warm wave. For the first time in her life, Sister Agatha wasn't invisible. She wasn't the background. She was the center of the world, and the world was cheering for her. Asterisk, the noise in the hall was deafening. It was a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards and into Sister Agatha's tired bones. Usually, loud noises made her anxious. Usually, she wanted to hide when people shouted. But this was different. This sound wasn't chaotic. It was full of warmth. It felt like a physical embrace, a heavy blanket of acceptance being draped over her shoulders. Agatha stood at the center of the stage. Bathed in the blinding spotlight, she felt small and shaky, like a newborn foal trying to find its legs. Her heart was still racing, pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel the sweat trickling down the back of her neck under her stiff white headpiece. She looked out at the sea of faces, but the bright lights made it hard to see them clearly. She could only see shapes, hundreds of people standing, their hands clapping together in a steady rhythm. She didn't know what to do. She had practiced a curtsy, but her legs felt like jelly. She managed a small, awkward bow, clutching her hands together in front of her chest. It wasn't elegant. It was just the honest movement of an old woman who was overwhelmed. The crowd didn't stop. The clapping only got louder. Someone whistled shrilly from the back. A man in the front row was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. The energy in the room had completely changed. Just 5 minutes ago, everyone was tired, bored, and ready to go home. Now, they were wide awake. They were alive. Sister Agatha had done that. She had poured her soul out onto the keys and they had drunk it in. Mr. Henderson, the director, walked onto the stage. He usually looked stressed and serious, but tonight he was beaming. He walked over to Agatha and gently took her arm, guiding her back toward the microphone. He leaned in and shouted over the applause, "Sister Agatha, take a bow. They love you." Agatha shook her head shyly, her face turning a deep shade of pink. "No, no," she whispered into the mic, her voice cracking. "It is the piano. It is a beautiful instrument." The crowd laughed affectionately. They knew better. They had heard the skill, the passion, the hours of life hidden in every note. Mr. Henderson helped her off the stage, but the moment her feet touched the carpeted floor of the aisle, she was surrounded. People didn't let her just slip away into the shadows this time. They formed a circle around her. It was incredible. A young woman with bright purple hair said, grabbing Agatha's hand, "I've never heard anything like that. Where did you learn to play? How long have you been hiding that talent?" A man in a suit asked, holding out his phone to show her a video he had recorded. "Look, the whole internet is going to see this." Agatha looked at the small screen. She saw a video of herself, her face intense and serious, her hands moving like magic. It felt strange. It felt like watching a stranger. She gently pushed the phone away. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. It felt too heavy, too bright. I played a long time ago," she stammered, looking from face to face. "Before I was a nun, I was just a girl who loved music. But life happens. We put things away. Shouldn't have put this away," the purple-haired girl said softly. "You're a genius." Agatha felt a tear slide down her cheek. For years, she had worried that she had wasted her life by staying in the convent. She worried that by choosing a quiet life of service, she had let her gift die. She thought God wanted her to be silent. But standing there, surrounded by these smiling strangers, she realized something profound. She hadn't wasted her gift. She had been marinating it. All the years of prayer, of suffering, of watching people, of being quiet, it had all gone into the music. The music she played tonight wasn't just technical skill. It was wisdom. It was a lifetime of feeling condensed into 10 minutes. She squeezed the young woman's hand. "We all have gifts," Agatha said, her voice finding strength again. "Some of us sing, some of us build. Some of us just know how to listen. We just have to find the right time to let them out." Mark, the young volunteer who had convinced her to play, was standing near the edge of the crowd. He was leaning against a wall, his arms crossed over his chest, grinning from ear to ear. He caught Agatha's eye and gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back at him. It was a genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She wasn't mad at him for forcing her into the spotlight. She was grateful. He had seen her when she felt invisible. The crowd began to thin out slowly. People stopped her to shake her hand or to get a selfie with her. It was a strange experience for a woman who usually walked through hallways unnoticed. Now, she was the celebrity of the night. She posed for pictures, standing patiently next to teenagers who towered over her. She signed a few scraps of paper with a trembling hand. Eventually, Mr. Henderson came back. "Okay, everyone, let's let Sister Agatha get some rest. She has a big day tomorrow, just like the rest of us." He gently escorted her through the double doors and into the quiet hallway. The noise of the hall faded behind them, replaced by the soft echo of their footsteps. The adrenaline that had been keeping Agatha upright suddenly wore off. Her knees buckled slightly, and she leaned heavily on the director's arm. "Are you all right, sister?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "That was quite a workout." "I am all right," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. "Just tired. Very tired." They walked slowly down the long corridor toward the small room where the nuns lived. It was a part of the building Agatha knew best. It was quiet, dark, and safe. The contrast between the flashing lights of the stage and the peaceful shadows of the hallway was jarring. "I'm sorry I didn't know," Mr. Henderson said suddenly as they walked. "I've worked here for 10 years. I see you every day. I never knew you were a concert pianist. I feel like I failed you." Agatha stopped walking. She turned to face him. She placed a frail hand on his forearm. "You did not fail me, Thomas. I hid it. I wanted to hide it. I thought my job here was to serve in the kitchen, to be invisible. I thought that was what humility meant. And now—" Agatha looked back toward the direction of the hall, where she could still faintly hear the music of the cleanup crew. "Now I know that hiding a light doesn't help anyone. We are supposed to let our light shine, aren't we? Even if it is an old, flickering light like mine." Thomas smiled. "It wasn't flickering tonight, sister. It was a beacon." He left her at the infirmary door, promising to bring her a cup of tea in the morning. Agatha went into her small, sparse room. It was exactly as she had left it hours ago. The bed was neatly made. The prayer book was on the nightstand. The chair held her mending basket. It looked like the room of a simple, old woman. She sat on the edge of the bed and took off her shoes. Her feet were swollen. Her back ached. She looked at her hands in the dim light of the lamp. They were red and puffy from exertion, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like useless claws. They felt like instruments of power. She lay back on the pillow and closed her eyes. She expected her mind to be racing with the excitement of the night. She expected to replay every note of the performance over and over again, but instead her mind went quiet. She didn't feel like celebrating. She felt a deep, profound peace. It was the kind of peace that comes after a heavy rain, when the air is clean and the ground is settled. She had shared her secret. She had offered the world what she had, and the world had accepted it. She didn't need to be famous. She didn't need to go on tour or make records. She just needed to know that she still had something to give. Before she drifted off to sleep, she whispered a prayer. It wasn't a prayer of thanks for the applause, and it wasn't a prayer for more opportunities. It was a simple prayer. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me play one last time." The next morning, Sister Agatha woke up early. The sun was streaming through the window, hitting the floorboards. She got out of bed, her joints stiff and creaky as usual. She put on her habit and brushed her hair. She looked in the mirror. The same old face looked back at her. Nothing had changed on the outside. She walked to the kitchen to start the breakfast preparations. The hallways were quiet. The event was over, and the center was returning to its normal routine. As she passed the assembly hall, the doors were open. The piano was still there, sitting on the stage. The cleanup crew had cleared away the chairs and the microphones. The room looked empty and bare. Agatha walked in. She didn't go to the kitchen. She went to the stage. She climbed the steps and stood in front of the piano. The lid was closed. It looked dormant again, like a sleeping beast. She opened the lid. She didn't sit down. She just wanted to see the keys. She touched them gently, her hand lingering on the white ivories. She thought about the night before. She thought about the people standing and clapping. It felt like a dream now, but the feeling in her hands was real. She heard a noise behind her. She turned to see a young girl standing there. It was the same little girl she had helped with the chairs days ago, the dancer. "Hi, sister," the girl said, holding a pair of ballet slippers. "Are you going to play again?" Agatha smiled. She looked at the piano, then at the girl. "Not right now, sweetie. I have oatmeal to make," the girl giggled. "Okay, but maybe later." "You're really good. Maybe later," Agatha said. She turned and walked down the stage steps. She walked out of the hall and toward the kitchen. She didn't walk with a shuffle today. She walked with a little bit of a bounce, a little bit of rhythm in her step. The world knew her secret now, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she knew it. She was Sister Agatha, the nun who cleaned floors and made soup. But she was also the woman who could make a piano sing. And she had a feeling that this time, the music wouldn't stay hidden away for so long. She would play again. Maybe not for a crowd, maybe just for the empty hall or for the children in the after-school program. But she would play, and that was enough.